In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a slip stitch. A slip stitch is a type of hand sewing that is similar to a blind stitch, but in this case, slip stitches are normally used in order to close a hole. So let's get started. Usually you do a slip stitch when you have a gap in your seam allowance. So in this seam right here, which I preed on my scrap, I've sewn from here to the end and then from here to the end, leaving this part of my seam open. You usually do this when you create something which you need to fill with stuffing, like a pillow, or if you have a casing and you're sticking something in the casing. So in order to close this hole, you need to do a little hand sewing. So you need to get your sewing needle, your hand sewing needle, and then also some thread. So I'm going to go ahead and do this in red so it'll be a little easier to see. Now if you do the slip stitch right, once this hole is closed, you should see very little, if nothing at all, of your stitching. So the first step is you're going to come from underneath the fold of one side. So I'm going to pick on the left hand side of this hole here, and I'm going to come from underneath my fold and then come up through to my top and pull this all the way through. I do that because I want the knot of my thread to end up underneath this gap here. So when it's closed, you're not going to see a knot. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and forth of each side of this, and I'm going to grab a little bit of fabric from each, at least right on the fold or right underneath the fold. So I'm going to grab a little bit on this side and then switch to this side and just go back and forth, pulling my thread through as I go, and you'll see slowly the hole will close. So okay, so I've went through on my right hand side, and now I'm going to go through on the left hand side, and I'm just going to pull a little bit of this side of the fabric. And I'm going to go all the way through. And you don't want to pull it really tight, but you definitely want to pull it tight enough so the hole does close all the way. So now I'm going to go back through my other side. And then keep going back and forth. And you're just grabbing just a little bit of fabric. And after you get a few stitches in, you'll see, like here's where I did my stitching. As soon as I pull this, it starts to close. If you don't have a very large hole, which you shouldn't, you can get this done fairly quickly. And once you reach the end, you just tie a knot in your thread, and that's all there is to it. I'm just getting to the end here. I only need to do a couple more stitches. This is how big my hole is now. So I'm just gonna finish it off here. So I'm just going to grab a little bit more on this side. And then once I've completed this, I'll show you how to tie a knot. So one more on this side. Okay, so to tie a knot, you may have just a little bit of a gap here at the end, which is fine because then you can stick your knot in there. So I'm going to go one more time on this other side here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go again on the same side. You don't have to really grab that much fabric, just a little bit. So what you're doing is creating a loop. You run your needle right through that loop. Whoops. And then you pull it all the way. And it creates a very tiny little knot. So once you have the knot, you can do a couple times if you think it's going to be pulled on a lot. You want to make sure it doesn't come out. I'm just going to cut my thread here. And now my hole is closed. So you can see my knot right here for my first time. And then you don't see my knot on top when I finished it because it's kind of more on the top hand. But if you use matching thread, then you should hardly even see this at all. So there it is. Now the slip stitch is complete.